questions on school choice. And so we'll start with Colleen Dippel with Families Empowered. Colleen.
Hi there. I hope, can everyone see me? Great.
Yes.
Hi, hello, how are you all? I was going to set my timer so that I was told very strict timing, and I want to make sure I'm respectful of that. So I'm just looking at my phone. I'm going to set my timer. And I'm going to start by saying thanks for having me. I'm really glad to see there are so many people in here today. So Families Empowered is a non-for-profit service organization based in Texas. Our vision is that all families will have access to schools that work for them, and them is the key, so that work for parents and kids. We provide free service to families. I'll give you a little bit of information about who those families are, but service means we connect families to schools and schools to families. So we're connecting literally thousands of families every year for free to school options. And so we provide families with information, tools, services, and actually direct support. We have a bilingual call center that is free 5 days a week, year round, with the exception of like Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving, but we are providing free services to families in Texas and for regions, like sort of urban regions. And we've been doing that for over 10 years, just about 11 years. Our reach, we serve over 105,000 parents. So we're adding families every day. They come to us through a bunch of mechanisms, but in the last year, it sort of exploded from families sending other families to us. And we are working in Houston metro area, Central Texas, Bexar County, which is San Antonio, and sort of some of the surrounding counties, and now in Fort Worth, Tarrant County area. So for folks in Texas, you'll know what I'm talking about. Anybody who's not from Texas, that's sort of, it's Houston, Fort Worth, Austin, and San Antonio, but that's not really, for those of us who are Texan, like an adequate way to describe our reach. So pretty big geographic reach. And so just a little bit about the families we serve. Our families are what I would say is majority minority families. 66% of the families we serve are Hispanic. The vast majority of those families prefer to engage with us in Spanish, which is their native language, first language. 24% of families we serve are Black, 3% Asian, and 2% white. So we are also a majority female, majority minority run led organization. And so we're really in the business of serving. And as I said before, we connect families to schools and schools to families. We do not put a preference on one kind of family. One kind of school or one kind of family, but one kind of school. So we work with district schools, traditional schools, magnet schools, zone schools. We work with public charter schools, and in Texas, we have a whole sort of diverse set of those kinds of schools, large CMOs, small and individual schools. We work with private schools, right? So we work with private schools largely that have scholarship money for kids. So we work with ACE scholarships, Cardinal Scholarship. We work with religious schools, secular schools, and then we also have historically worked with homeschooling. And I'm just going to put that on like a side burner and say that's not really our primary thrust, but COVID has really given us a lot of insight into what parents want. But so we say our core customers are parents, right? We partner with schools in service to parents. We partner with all of those diverse schools. We also worked with historically virtual schools. And again, that's a whole area where we went from sort of it being, not really a ton of demand for that before COVID to now just lots of explosive demand. So we are a parent service organization. We are not a think tank. We are a do tank. We are service. We're in the service of parents. Parents are our core customers. We listen to parents. We also engage in survey work. Again, not for sort of research purposes always, although we have partnered with Columbia, the University of Southern California, and now we're working with the CDC to collect data for instruments that they are using for research purposes, but that is not what we do. And I'm saying that all to say that we've been in the service of parents for decades, so we have a lot of insight and experience, but we are not like pushing out white papers and research, although we have supported others who do that. We can do that because we serve families for free. And just one other note, so 60% of our families live on about $50,000 a year or less, and about 30% are living on $33,000 a year or less. So we are really focusing on a very specific set of families, and those are folks who have historically been left out of sort of opportunities in education and some of the best schools, quote unquote, that we have. And I think the redlining conversation gave you a little bit of insight into sort of the history of maybe how we got to where we are. Also, it's not, obviously there's lots more to talk about there. So I want to just say before COVID, there's sort of life BC and life AC. BC is before COVID. So before COVID, we were serving thousands of parents, right? Which is still true. Most were really coming to us for district school options or charter school options. So we have massive wait lists for charter schools in the state of Texas. That's just verifiable. And so they would come to us looking for options, maybe frustrated with their current option or at a transition year. The things they were looking for: safety, responsiveness, right? These were the things that they cared about, and then quality. So after COVID, let's just say last year, we had a 3 million person reach on our, like across all of our channels. So and we increased by many thousands of parents our data. So we also have a big data infrastructure, which is how we know how many people we're serving. So lots of just demand for more choices and more options. We recently did a pre-K survey along with Children at Risk and some other groups in Houston. We hoped in our micro surveys to get 300 responses, parent responses. We got 700 in the state of Texas and 2,000. It just sort of like got shared nationwide. That's a pretty good sample size. So we've got lots of engagement. So after COVID, what we're seeing are sort of parents who normally would have just kind of like gone to their neighborhood school, just really engaged. So that's a good thing. I think that's a really positive thing. We're getting daily calls. And so what we've learned is that parents want all options on the table. So before COVID, as I said before, homeschooling and virtual schooling were very, not really kind of stuff that we had a lot of demand, like interest in. And very rarely would we be sort of directing people to Texas Homeschool Coalition. Last year, we had about 5,000 families who were like, I need help with this and I want to do this. And it was we did a lot of Facebook Lives. That was our most watched Facebook Live. So honestly, two things. What we saw was massive demand for homeschooling, and then lots of families choosing the virtual option. So in the state of Texas, schools were open 5 days a week for in-person, and most had a virtual option that parents could opt into. Many of our parents, especially at the beginning of the year, chose our virtual option. And many really wanted this year to go back, I think, to in-person. That was a lot of what our data told us. And we know from our testing data that probably in-person is really the best setting for most of our kids. In the last few weeks, that's changed. We're getting calls every day about virtual schooling. So just want to be mindful of time. So let me just talk a little bit about school choice, because it's a loaded word, and I'm just going to put that out there. We believe in and support funding following students to schools that their parents feel is best for them. And I know that can be loaded and slightly controversial. All of our work with parents over the last decade leads us to believe that this is really the most equitable path forward. And so the question really is why? And by the way, we're not an advocacy group. We spend our time serving, but when asked, we answer honestly. So why? So one, no one group of parents are forced in a situation where funding follows students into one model of schooling. Last year, COVID taught us more than ever before that we need multiple models for our diverse students. More school options allows parents who are both taxpayers and we believe the most important stakeholders in the life of a child have power, autonomy, and options. It also helps to dial down some of these really intense curriculum debates. So we would like to see more culturally responsive schools, classical schools. There are some parents we've heard want zero tolerance. They want schools with very strict discipline. Some want schools, okay, so I'm on the like tail end of this. So that was my warning. We've heard some parents want uniforms. This masking thing has been really interesting. Some parents want masks, some parents don't. School choice, school options would give people the ability to find schools that are actually aligned with what they want. It also creates greater local control because schools need to be responsive to constituents in their communities, and we think that would help. We know that there are parents who feel trapped. We've spent 10 years listening to parents crying, parents looking. Here are the reasons: bullying, curriculum sped. They have options if they're given some funding following their kids, and COVID again illuminated this. So what do we think that means? We think that, you know, one, here's what we would say. We feel, so this is interesting because virtual, I was prepared to talk about school choice. So I'm not really, virtual options. I think what we would say is in the state of Texas, it was not so great, right? So 28% of Black students in the state of Texas passed the Algebra 1 exam. 28% passed last year. I mean, that, you know, and the majority of kids who did better on our exams, and we can debate all day whether or not, you know, our exams are flawed or whatever, but we're kids who were in person in school. So that means, one, we need to get as many kids back into school as possible. We've been engaging in a Re-enroll Texas campaign that's focused on doing that. But it probably means that we also need to improve a virtual option. So we're hearing from parents that they want that on the table. COVID has set up a situation where I think we can't put the genie back in the bottle, where we're going to say to parents, like, you're not the most essential person, when in fact for 18 months, we've told our parents they are the primary caregiver, they are going to be responsible. We can't say to them, oh no, just kidding. And so our parents want all of these options on the table. We think it is really important for districts. What does this mean, I guess, for our traditional districts is really the question, to really embrace innovation, to embrace creating and developing multiple models, multiple pathways, including virtual pathways, and improving those. I think there's some chat, there's lots in the chat. General question. I'm going to go on to questions. So I guess what I would say is, you know, in 10 years, what we've seen is not a decrease for school options and school choice. We've seen an increase. There's lots of national polls. I'll put a few in the chat that support this. So this isn't just kind of like our, you know, our idea. If parents didn't want options, we wouldn't have over 100,000 families who we have their addresses, their phone numbers, their cell phone numbers. We've talked to them, like we can verify them. Who looked for options. So the question is, how do we do that, and how do we do it in a high quality way? Wendy, I don't know how many virtual schools there are in Texas. I think that's a really challenging question, largely because again, because of our funding mechanism. So we really haven't had the ability to create lots of high quality options. And we've seen some of our quality options convert to charter. Lots of this, again, is tied to funding. So funding followed students. I think we would have better choices there. 28% of kids passed. Yeah, so Lori, I think there will probably be some later in the panel from U of H and from HERC who can talk through our STAR data. Lori, that is Texas. Okay, thanks. Anna just answered that. just do the homeschooling question. Okay. Oh, sorry. So let me just say a little bit. Someone asked me about homeschooling. Homeschooling is fascinating. Homeschooling was on the rise. Actually, the fastest demographic of homeschooling growth in Texas before COVID was in the African-American community. And most people are like, what? But if you go to the Texas Homeschool Coalition, you can get their information on this. We had thousands of parents asking about homeschooling. We're supportive of homeschooling. If that's what a family wants to do, that's great. But homeschooling as your default because you're afraid to go into your school feels really rough. I mean, I'm an educator. I'm a Texas certified teacher. I have a master's in ed leadership. I have 2 children. I would really have a hard time homeschooling. So it really, homeschooling as an intentional, planned, purposeful thing is really powerful for lots of kids and families. Homeschooling as your scared default option, I think, is really concerning to me. And if parents are choosing that out of fear, that's worrisome, right? So we should ask ourselves, so why is that a growing option, right? And it might be because we are not providing enough choice within our publicly funded system to give parents what they need. So why is it? I mean, we should be asking parents this, right? Like, why is it that prior to COVID, African Americans in Texas were the fastest growing homeschool population? Some of it has to do with a lack of culturally responsive teaching. Some of it has to do with suspension rates. So how can our schools actually provide schools that parents want and parents need? I think it's possible. Like, I think we can do this, but we certainly, and again, I'm not a funding expert, but I'm not sure our data supports continuing to try to tweak and fix the system that was designed, as we just heard with the prior speaker, so many years ago for so many kids. Anyway, who it is.
Thanks, Colleen.
Failing.
Colleen,
Yeah.
Thank you so much. You've given us some great food for thought as we continue with our program. But we're at time limit and need to transition.